on this fourth missionary journey, has probably now landed in Spain and is doing ministry there, was there during the late stages of the Roman Empire, or the Roman emperor named Nero. Now, Nero, if you have studied Roman history, was famous for his brutality, for his cruelty. Nero murdered his first wife, then he murdered his second wife, then he murdered the husband of a third woman so he could marry her. He murdered his opponents politically. He was cruel, he was brutal, he was paranoid, and he was the emperor of Rome. While he was busy consolidating his personal power by murdering his enemies, by confiscating their wealth, by doing all of those kinds of things, the empire of Rome was starting to weaken as an empire. There were growing revolts in different parts of the Roman Empire, including England. England was one of those faraway places that Rome ruled, but England was one of the places where rioting and revolts against the Roman Empire were starting to happen under Nero as the emperor. Well, all of that's happening, and in the year 64, there was a fire in the city of Rome. Rome is the capital city of the Roman Empire. Nero happened to be out of town at that point, and a fire broke out, and the fire burned for 5 days, history tells us, and destroyed a third of the city of Rome. Nero apparently came racing back to Rome to try and fulfill his responsibility as the leader, but because Nero had such a terrible reputation, the people didn't believe that he cared. In fact, the rumor began that Nero had started the fire so that he could clear space in the city of Rome for another personal palace. So Rome is weakening as an empire. Nero is being blamed for this horrific tragedy that hit the city of Rome. And Nero decided to turn attention away from himself, and he blamed the Christians. He said that the Christians were the fault of everything and that they were the enemies of humanity. And he started a strong empire-wide persecution of Christians, specifically just so that people weren't talking about him. This persecution was what drove Christians. Some were executed, many were executed. Some, if you've heard of the Catacombs of Rome, these are caverns and caves and things under the city of Rome. This was the time where Christians started hiding in the catacombs, was when persecution started across the empire. While the persecution started, Paul is likely in Spain. Remember that Paul had before this, for 2 years, been preaching boldly and without hindrance in the city of Rome. Everybody in Rome at this point is going to know who Paul is. Right now, Paul is in Spain, probably writing 1 Timothy and Titus. So 1 Timothy is a letter to Pastor Timothy. And the letter is both encouraging and challenging. It's a personal letter, but it's one of those personal letters that's meant to be seen publicly. And so he's got some encouraging words for Timothy. He says, Timothy, you are called to do this. You need to go ahead and don't let people look down on you because you're young, but you lead. You're ready for this. And it was an encouraging word to Timothy. At the same time, it was challenging because Paul said, here is the way churches should operate. He didn't list lots and lots of details, but it's in 1 Timothy where we first read, here are the qualifications for leaders in the church. Timothy, when the church is choosing elders to provide leadership, here are the qualifications that they should meet. They should be mature, and he lists many things. When you choose deacons to provide serving leadership in the church, here are the characteristics. Here's the kind of people who should be selected as deacons. And he basically talks about the church organization and church leadership and how church should function so that this young pastor Timothy would be able to continue the ministry in Paul's absence. There's also some very nice kind of personal notes about Timothy. Be careful of your health. It's a very personal letter. Paul obviously cared deeply for Timothy. He wanted him to succeed as a pastor. He wanted him to be healthy as a man. And so all of that is packed into this letter, including things like, how should the church take care of widows? How do people in the church function? So if you want to know how a church should function, 1 Timothy is a particularly good place to look. Well, his next letter was very similar. It was to Pastor Titus, who he has left on Crete to lead the church there. Same kinds of things. There are some personal notes, there's some encouraging notes, and he talks a little bit more about how the church should be structured, how to select leaders, things like that in the book of Titus. And in Titus, he adds some notes about how the church, not the organization, but the people of God, should function as citizens. He writes to Titus that Christians should be good citizens. We should contribute in a positive way to the culture that we find ourselves in. Now that's easy to say, but remember, right when he was writing this, great persecution was breaking out across the Roman Empire on the Christians, while Paul is telling the Christians that they should be good citizens of this empire that is now persecuting them. That makes our decisions as followers of Christ a little bit more complicated. And Titus is the place we go for that kind of information. Well, Paul at some point finished his ministry in Spain and traveled back. In his letter to Titus, he said, I'd like to meet you in a town called Nicopolis. Nicopolis was on the other side of the province from where Philippi was. But apparently Paul's plan was to go to Nicopolis and spend several months there and use that as his home base for yet another missionary journey. And so he wrote to Titus and said, I'm going to be there. I would love for you to come and visit me. Probably I want to meet you. I love you. I want to see you. And I'm going to teach you some more. But the plan was to go to Nicopolis, to meet Titus, and then to go have additional ministry. It appears that Paul went to Nicopolis, but did not end up staying to continue his ministry. For some reason, he went to Nicopolis and then went back across over into the province of Asia, where we're told in 2 Timothy chapter 4 that he went to Troas. 2 Timothy chapter 4 tells us Paul went to Troas, a city he has been to before, and stayed with a friend named Carpus. At this point, Paul is arrested. We don't have a whole lot of information on that. We know he was arrested. And because this is the Roman Empire, there were no search warrants. There was no process. Probably in the middle of the night sometime, the Roman soldiers knocked the door down and they simply dragged Paul off and hauled him off to Rome. We know that because later Paul says, please bring my cloak, I'm cold. He didn't even have time to pack his coat. He was simply dragged out of the house, and instead of being put under house arrest, as in his last time, this time the Roman Empire is persecuting Christians. And so Paul is not treated well. He's thrown into a prison that is basically just a dark, cold cave waiting for his execution, which we'll pick up in our next session.